The diner sat at the corner of Maple and 3rd, its neon sign flickering faintly against the early evening haze. The air outside smelled faintly of rain, that metallic promise that always came before a storm, and the streets shimmered with the reflection of streetlights just starting to glow. Inside, the world was smaller, quieter, the hum of the refrigerator blending with the slow murmur of a half-forgotten song from the jukebox. Daniel pushed open the glass door, its handle cold and greasy with use, and stepped into the warmth. He wasn't supposed to be here, not really. He had promised himself he'd cook something simple at home. A reheated stew, maybe, or the leftover lasagna that had sat in his fridge since Sunday, but the apartment had felt too silent tonight. Too much like an echo chamber of his own thoughts. So he'd walked, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, until he ended up here again, in the diner that never seemed to close. He took his usual booth in the far corner, where he could see the door but not be seen right away. The waitress, a woman named Carol who'd been working there since before he'd moved to town, caught his eye and gave him a little nod. She didn't ask what he wanted. She knew. Coffee, black, and the chicken pot pie special. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and that was enough. As he sat there, he tried not to think too much about why he came here. It wasn't just the food, or the routine. It was the sense of being surrounded by life, small fragments of it, at least. The couple arguing softly over dessert, the man at the counter reading his newspaper like the world beyond the pages didn't exist, the teenage boy sweeping the floor and glancing at his phone every few seconds. All of them had stories. All of them were living. It helped Daniel feel less like a ghost. He reached for his cup as Carol slid it across the table. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice casual, but there was something knowing in her tone. "Just long," he said. She nodded and gave him a faint smile before disappearing to take another order. He watched her move, quick, practiced, the kind of rhythm you only build after years of doing the same thing every day. He liked that. Predictability. It was something he could hold on to when the rest of life felt uncertain. He ate slowly, savoring the warmth of the pie, the buttery crust breaking under his fork. Outside, rain began to tap gently against the glass. It was the kind of night that invited memories, unwanted, unfiltered. His wife, Claire, had loved the rain. She'd open every window in the house to listen to it, even if it meant the whole place smelled like wet earth for days. It had been 2 years since the accident, and still, the thought of rain made his chest tighten. He pushed the plate away and stared into his coffee. He'd thought loneliness would feel like silence. But it wasn't. It was noise, the sound of a TV with no one watching, the creak of the refrigerator door, the phantom buzz of a phone that no longer rang. It was the sound of life moving on without you. The bell above the door jingled. Daniel barely looked up. He had grown used to the late evening crowd, tired workers, travelers passing through, a handful of regulars. But this time, something about the sound of hurried footsteps caught his attention. When he glanced up, he saw a woman, young, maybe late 20s, pushing open the door with one arm while holding the hand of a small boy with the other. They were soaked, the kind of soak that only came from being caught in a sudden downpour without an umbrella. The woman's coat clung to her shoulders, her hair plastered to her face. The boy, no older than 6 or 7, looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Carol hurried over. "You poor things," she said. "Come on in, sit wherever you like. I'll grab some towels." The woman smiled weakly and guided the boy to a booth near the front. They sat, shivering a little, whispering quietly to each other. Daniel watched them for a moment, then looked away. It wasn't his business. People came and went from this place all the time, each carrying their own storms. Still, something tugged at him, a faint ache he couldn't quite name. He noticed when Carol came back with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She set them down gently, adding a small plate with crackers and a few leftover cookie halves from the counter jar. The boy's eyes lit up. "Thank you," he said, his voice small but earnest. The woman smiled again, this time a little more fully, and nodded her gratitude. Daniel tried to return to his coffee, but the sound of the boy's laughter pulled at him. It was soft at first, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to laugh here. Then, when his mother made a silly face, it burst out of him in a way that made a few other diners look up and smile. That sound, pure and unguarded, made Daniel's chest ache. He thought about leaving. He was finished eating anyway, and the rain was easing up. But something in him refused to move. Maybe it was because the woman looked so tired, the kind of tired that went deeper than lack of sleep. Or maybe it was because the boy reminded him of someone, of what he once wanted, of what he'd lost. Whatever it was, he found himself still sitting there long after his cup was empty. The woman caught his gaze once by accident. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion, but kind. She gave a small, apologetic smile before turning back to the boy. There was a tenderness in the way she brushed his wet hair back, the way she broke her cookie in half to give him the bigger piece. Daniel felt something twist inside him. A memory, maybe. A longing. He was about to look away again when Carol approached their table, lowering her voice. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she said to the woman, "but we close the kitchen at 10. You sure you don't want to order something warm before then?" The woman hesitated. I don't know. We just came in to get out of the rain. I didn't realize how late it was." Her voice trembled a little. "I don't have much cash on me tonight." Carol smiled softly. "Don't you worry about that," she said. "You two stay as long as you need." The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry," he whispered. Daniel didn't realize he'd moved until he was already standing. His chair scraped softly against the tile. Carol and the woman both looked up, startled. "Sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "I couldn't help overhearing. If it's all right," he hesitated, unsure why he was doing this. "I was just about to order something else. Maybe I could get a little extra." "No trouble." The woman opened her mouth to protest. "Oh, no, we couldn't. Please," Daniel interrupted gently. "It'd make me feel better, honestly. I hate eating alone." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after a long pause, she nodded. "That's very kind of you," she said quietly. Carol gave him a knowing look, half amusement, half approval, before heading to the counter. "All right, I'll bring out another couple plates." Daniel sat back down, but this time, he didn't retreat to his corner. He slid into the booth across from the woman and the boy. The boy looked at him curiously, his small hand still clutching his mug. "Hi," he said shyly. "I'm Leo." "Hi, Leo," Daniel said, smiling. "I'm Daniel." The woman smiled too, a little embarrassed. "I'm Rachel." "Thank you again. You really didn't have to." "Maybe I did," Daniel said softly. "Some days we all need someone to sit with." They talked, at first cautiously. Rachel explained that they'd been on their way back from visiting her sister in the next town when her old car had broken down. The rain had started, and she hadn't known where else to go. "This was the only place with lights still on," she said, glancing around the diner. "It felt safe." Daniel nodded. "It is. Carol runs it like her own living room." They laughed at that, and soon the food arrived, 2 steaming plates of spaghetti and meatballs. Leo's eyes widened, and Daniel felt something warm bloom in his chest. Watching the boy dig in, so full of simple joy, reminded him of dinners long gone. He didn't realize how much he missed that sound, the clinking of cutlery, the quiet chatter, the small interruptions of everyday life that used to fill his evenings. They talked for over an hour. Rachel told him about her job at a small daycare, about how she'd been trying to go back to school part-time. Daniel told her, carefully, about his work at the hardware store, about moving to this town after everything changed. He didn't tell her about Claire. Not yet, but something in her eyes told him she understood that kind of silence. By the time the rain stopped, the diner was almost empty. Carol had turned off the jukebox, and the only sound left was the hum of the lights. Rachel stood and helped Leo with his jacket. "We should get going," she said softly. "Thank you for the meal. You really didn't have to do that." Daniel stood too. "It was nothing," he said. "Where are you staying tonight?" She hesitated. "There's a small motel near the highway. If they still have a room." He frowned. "You sure it's safe?" "It's what we can afford," she said simply. He wanted to offer more, to pay for their room, to drive them there, but he stopped himself. She had dignity, and he respected that. So instead, he said, "Let me walk you out." They stepped into the night. The air was cool, the streets still glistening from the rain. Leo held his mother's hand, yawning as they walked. At the corner, Rachel turned to him. "Thank you, Daniel, for dinner. And for not making it feel like charity." "It wasn't," he said. "It was company." She smiled, that tired but genuine kind of smile that reached her eyes. Good night," he said. He watched as they walked away, their figures slowly swallowed by the mist. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a man waiting out the clock. He felt connected, seen, alive. When he went back inside, Carol was wiping down the counter. She looked up at him and grinned. "You've got a good heart, Daniel." He shrugged. "Just didn't want to eat alone tonight." She chuckled. "Funny thing about kindness, it's never just about the other person." He smiled faintly and slid a few bills onto the counter. When he stepped outside again, the night seemed different, cleaner somehow. He tilted his head up to the sky, where the clouds were beginning to part, revealing faint stars beyond the city's glow. He started walking home, the sound of his own footsteps mingling with the lingering rhythm of rain in the gutters. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, a small but certain crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. He didn't know it yet, but that night, that small act of shared kindness, was the beginning of something that would change all three of their lives.